episode of the Borderlands show, and I am here welcoming back Glenn Grant from, I think, the second or third episode. I forget. We're on day 7 right now. People ask me what day of the week it is of the world since Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And if you're just coming to this show, or if you're not familiar with it, Borderlands is a show which is I put together to talk about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and this event that's affecting the place where I live. I call home Kyiv, although I'm not there right now. It's where I live. I'm engaged to my fiance from Kyiv, from Ukraine, actually President Zelensky's hometown. And we can't wait to go back there when this is all over. So I'm bringing Glenn on here. Last night we had 3 amazing Ukrainians who were back there participating in the defense of their country. They were on live, giving their perspective on what's going on. And now I wanted to bring in some outside perspective again to zoom out a little bit with Glenn on what's going on with the Russian army. And also Glenn, again, is a retired lieutenant colonel from the British Army, my other home country aside from America. And obviously Ukraine now. I was born in Belfast, where Glenn served in the streets probably when I was growing up, and then moved to America. So Dave is from my American side, the best, probably the smartest and best Army officer I know from the U.S. Army, from Ohio, and that's where he's coming in from now. So let's just open it up here and welcome Dave, welcome Glenn.
Welcome. Good to be here. Thank you.
And good to see you again, Dave. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So let me start this out with a question, and I want to hear from you first, Dave, or actually Glenn. What's going on with the Russian army? That's the topic of the media these days. What do you think's going on right now with the Russian army?
Right this second, it appears to be falling apart. And there are so many little examples of what we could call stupidities in there that it looks as though it's breaking. You've got people who are leaving their vehicles. You've got people who are deliberately running out of fuel so that they don't have to go to the front line. You've got people actually just turning around and walking away. And we've heard that it's possible that the Marine Brigade in Crimea has mutinied. And we don't know for 100% sure that that's true, but they have not landed, despite the fact that they were supposed to have landed around Odessa. And we've also just got what could only be described as magnificent failure, fighting failure all over the place.
President Zelensky's hometown. Go ahead, Glenn. What do you say, magnificent fighting failure? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you actually take a company of guys, then they should be able to do the basic tactical drills. That they should, look after their vehicles properly. They should know how to do movement. They should know how to do counterattacks. They should know how to attack. They should know how to call down artillery fire, how to call down air support, all sorts of basic military skills. And the Russian army that we've seen seems incapable of doing any of those, as though in many cases, as though they're just not trained. A large part of them is not trained. But I think you've also got to go back one layer and just say that a lot of the things that they are being asked to do are just, sorry, but militarily incompetent. So they're being given tasks that are just non-starters. And when you put the two things together, a tactical incompetence and an operational task that is also set to be a failure before you even start. I mean, I give you an example: flying 3 helicopters of special forces in to an area near Odessa, right across the front of the air defense. So whoopee, 2 helicopters get shot down, and it's well, they would do, wouldn't they? I mean, it's just so stupid. It's just such a stupid task, and they keep, you know, driving towards places, but not in a proper fighting formation, as though you know they're not going to get attacked and nothing's going to happen. Well, unfortunately, it does. You know, I mean, people attack them and kill them because they're just so incompetent. And it's a shock. I mean, I knew that they had problems with alcohol. I knew that they had problems with still the Soviet mentality in the system. But it never occurred to me that the end result of those things could be just such a gross level of military incompetence, of a magnificent scale. And it's so lucky for the Ukrainians that they were so incompetent, that they are so incompetent.
Mm-hmm. So, Dave, I'm going to kick this one over to you. What do you think's happened? What's going on?
I'm with Glenn on a lot of that, and I won't reiterate a lot of that, but that's a huge shock, because we've been, you know, guys like us were prepared as youngsters against the Krasnovians and later the Danovian opposing force at our training centers that modeled the Soviet Russian style of warfare, and we're expecting standards and discipline and hardened soldiers who were well trained and ready to execute their battle task, and you're not seeing any of that. Take it up a notch, you see Russian commanders who have a complete inability to synchronize the warfighting functions or the battlefield operating systems that would enable their ground forces to actually have any kind of tactical success. Their indirect fires are in support of maneuver are completely ineffective right now. Where's the Russian Air Force at? And that kind of goes back to Glenn's comment about the Ukrainian air defense network. Every indication is that Ukrainian air defense systems are intact, are still networked, and Ukraine has a great picture of the airspace. And what that does is it negates Russia's ability to even generate localized air superiority. You know, so at the operational strategic level, their planning, their processes, their estimates, their assumptions were missing or completely incorrect, which, you know, shows a lack of, you know, understanding, education, and responsibility at their senior officer levels and inside their Ministry of Defense, you know, their bureaucratic structure. It's either missing, it's incomplete, and regardless, it's incompetent operational and strategic military leadership in Russia. That's just absolutely dumbfounding. And the last thing I'll hit on this is their military readiness is really, really something that you got to call into question. What kind of reports were, you know, senior leaders in the Russian Ministry of Defense receiving from their subordinate units that were saying, hey, we're combat ready, we're combat effective, we're ready to go? You know, I'm above a 90% operational readiness. I have, you know, 96 hours of sustainment capability on hand to enable this attack to happen, right? Did they send that kind of report? Did they not? Was it an awful assumption? You know, there's just a complete breakdown at the operational and strategic levels that's just kind of dumbfounding. You would expect that if there was any level of competence, that's where it would be in that senior leadership, but it just seems void.
Well, maybe it would help if the political leadership would tell you that you're going to go fight a war versus a training center.
Oh, that always helps.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the comment you made about reports, because my my Bulgarian colleague Vlad is constantly reminding me that reports are not there for the information in the report. Reports are there for the beauty of the report.
Yeah.
so that you're sending something so that you can say you've sent a report, and the report must be wondrous in its wondrousness. And then you've done it. Then you've sent the report. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to have anything that's relevant to the actual activity. It's just the wondrousness of the report itself. And he said it's exactly the same when you're doing you could say verbal things like speeches and talking about orders and everything else. It's the wondrousness of the speech and the wondrousness of the order that is important in this society. And so people get promoted who can write these wondrous reports, even though what's in them is complete and utter garbage. And so what they do is, they shape the report, to use that great expression. It's not a lie to tell someone what they want to hear. And so the report is designed to tell the person above you what it is he wants. It's got nothing to do with reality at all.
Right. There's personal, not just professional risk, but a lot of personal risk in sending an honest report.
In sending an honest report, yes. No, that's exactly right. And it's even worse than, as we can see now, it's even worse than we even imagined. Right. Honesty has been driven out of the system completely, at every level.
Was it ever there, Glenn? That's the question.
That's a good question. Oh no, I think. Well, I would think at the end of the Second World War, it probably was. And if stories I hear from periods during the Cold War, it was. But it clearly isn't now.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I just wanted to bring up here is, and I was talking to Dave about this, and I, couple points that I'm realizing here is, remember when President Zelensky was saying this isn't going to happen, this isn't going to happen. What I'm starting to think is actually, of course, the Ukrainian military had spies inside of the Russian military because they're all related, they're kin, cousins. And if the Russian military didn't know, then the Ukrainian military thought that this was just a big training exercise too, and it was just a big bluff because that's the intelligence they were getting. What do you think of that theory? Because then you notice the mood changed a couple days before the war.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of it like that, but you may well have hit upon something quite serious there. Yeah, because the boys are saying they didn't know, and therefore it might well be right that they're just saying no, we're on exercise. So no whispers of getting ready for war. And certainly, you see, they weren't given extra fuel. And they weren't given extra food. Both of those indicators, and the medical wasn't there. So those indicators that are key indicators were missing even up to the time they crossed the start line. They still weren't there at all.
Yeah. And this is where I think what you're seeing right now, there's massive reports. This is not just some rumors here and there, but across the battlefield from multiple news organizations, there's these reports that everyone in the Russian army is out of fuel and they're out of food, and looting is getting worse, which is not only bad for the Russian army, it's bad for the people of Ukraine who are also going to start running short on food. And you also have this reality that you're not going to fix a bunch of vehicles that are out of fuel by sending in more vehicles behind them. What's that going to do? Especially when half of them may be destroyed.
Yeah, you just eat more fuel.
Yeah. So, how does this end, Dave, Glenn?
I think what you see is, with the commitment of follow-on forces by Russia, just what you guys hit on is you're increasing your requirements for logistics. And also the lines of communication that Russia did open up in Ukraine they're clogged with junk now. And you had a great picture you put on earlier, Sam, that the road completely blocked by destroyed Russian equipment. That's, you're not passing through that now. So they're not fixing the problem. on the Russian perspective. The problem is sustainment. The problem's not combat power. But when you commit more combat power, they're complicating their log problem, probably well beyond their capability and capacity to fix at this point.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good point. Whether it is fixable, I don't think it is now. No. And I think what David said is absolutely right there. And I mean, the other thing is that, you've got two problems there. The serious. The first one is that log problem, and every time you add more vehicles to the whole thing, you're just causing yourself more problems in many ways. The second thing is the morale problem. Is what David said about the roads being clogged. I mean, if you've got to go through those roads because everybody's dead and all the vehicles are killed, what is the quality of morale like for any soldier having passed, what he can see is a division's worth of dead vehicles, and he thinks, shit, I'm next, and which of course is absolutely true. He is. And this morale thing is going to be the thing that breaks it, I think. And there's a real chance that they could break any time from now. I mean, I know that there are places where people are actually doing quite well. Mariupol is one, and the Russian forces that have gone in there seem to be fighting quite well. And there are other one or two other places where they're fighting quite well, but it looks to me as though those places are, because where Mariupol is, it looks to me as though those places are actually where they're using the separatist forces who've been fighting for the last 7 or 8 years, and that is actually they're the gold standard. Whereas I think most of the analysts before were thinking that they were low quality, and the gold standard was going to be the Russian forces that came in. It's proven to be the reverse.
Yeah, one thing I would love to get into, I don't have access, since I'm retired, I don't have access to the great systems of the intelligence community in the United States, but I would love to see the makeup of units between what the Russians consider professional enlisted soldiers and then conscripts. So about 40% of their army's conscript. 60% are contracted enlistments. And Russia generally does not mix conscripts and contracted enlisted soldiers together in units. So units are generally full of conscripts or they're contracted soldiers. So it would be really interesting to get the data on what units have what makeup and where they are in Ukraine.
Yeah, and what's the balance within a unit of conscripts and professionals?
Right.
And I mean, there's obviously something grossly wrong in all these things. I mean, if they've got so many actual contract soldiers, professional soldiers, we haven't seen any evidence of this so far. So, even if they're holding them back, where are they? And if they are there, then they're not actually being very professional.
Right.
Well, here's a thought on that, and I think it's very important for people to understand that when the one thing that you can't measure before armies take the field is the spirit of the army, and in the Ukrainian army, because I know a lot of Ukrainians from living there, I never doubted the Ukrainian fighting soldiers' will to fight. That is clear. But I also was not very confident in the Ukrainian army's senior leadership to coordinate at a large scale a countrywide battle where you see counterattacks, where you see resupplies, where you see air defense, and that's what I think everyone was concerned about. Is the government going to stand, and can the generals coordinate large-scale conflict? And everyone assumed that the Russian army could do that because that's what we always thought based on history, based on our observation of the Russian army, which we spied on forever, as the United States military has done. And I can't help but think, Glenn, that you know, they had these reforms in Russia 15 years ago, and now was supposed to be the coming out party. Something has gone horribly wrong, even since 2014, which is the last time Ukraine has faced the Russian army in the field. And it seems that there's just, maybe it was always just, as they call it, a paper tiger or a Potemkin village or whatever you want to call it. But all armies ultimately are a reflection of the society they serve. And an army's spirit, its will to fight, is simply a reflection of, are people willing to lay down their life for the regime they serve? And that is, I think, the most, I wouldn't call it shocking, because I think a lot of people have known for a long time Russia is corrupt, and just people must, it just must have deteriorated, atrophied greatly in the last even 8 years.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that the reality is that, and you could see it from recent pictures, but they simply did not get rid of the old Soviet generals. I mean, you look at the meetings when Putin's there, and all the generals sitting there. They're old school. You can see it. You know, they're old, they're tired, they're grey-faced, they're overweight. There's not an ounce of sharpness, military sharpness, amongst any of the generals. And if you don't change the generals and you don't bring on the youngsters, then as they, you know, the fish rots from the head, as they say. And I think that's been one problem. The second thing is, I think that, you know, the culture was bad and the culture has remained bad. And people have tried to buy their way out of this. I mean, Putin tried to buy out by raising the money for professional soldiers. Okay, that brings people in for money, maybe, but it doesn't actually change the culture. And if anything, you know, it may have actually made the culture worse, because
that money's not worth so much right now.
Well, so the money's not worth so much right now. No, it's true. But of course, you know, when you're getting extra money for promotion and things like this, then it can breed, and you don't have a proper system for promotion, then it can breed more nepotism type things. And you know, you pay me and I'll get you promoted. And so it actually can make the system worse than it was before. And that clearly, that some of these things have happened. They have not changed the culture. They haven't changed how they deal with the manpower. You can see that from the conscripts. You know, the people are not valued. That is probably the most important thing that we pick out of this in the Russian army. And, you know, that's Putin's view of society, isn't it? You say it reflects society. He's been cutting money from his social programs, from education, from health, to fund the army. Well, if you do that, you're saying you don't care about people. You know, no roads to villages, no improvement to the rail network for people to get around the country. All those things are a reflection, and they're reflected into how the army operates. And we missed it. It was staring us in the face.
Well, so here's a question for, and I think the Ukrainian military knew this, that the Russian military was in no shape to fight, and they were on exercise, and Putin, let's give him credit, as a former KGB officer, he fooled everyone, especially his own officers. And it seems like the invasion of Ukraine was a bigger surprise to the Russian soldiers than even the Ukrainians at some point, because they literally, a lot of the junior soldiers did not know this is not a live fire. This is actually combat. And they went in and they were shocked.
That is true of some, but there's also, if you go on the social media, you can actually see that there's a lot of them did know they were going, and they wanted to go there and duff over the Nazis and everything else. So you've got groups that didn't know, and then you've got groups that did know. And those groups that did know, that you can, I saw some tweets and things today from them, were simply nasty in their view of what they were going to do to the Ukrainians. So yeah. Either way, it was a shock.
Yeah. Well, that's my next question Question for both of you. Do you think Putin actually believed his own lies to his own generals that Ukrainians would welcome them into the country? I mean, this is probably one of the most catastrophic operational strategic plans in a long time in military history in terms of assumptions. What do you think? Where do you think that came from?
He thinks along the lines that they're really one people, that they're all Rus, but he can't separate Kiev and Rus from Muscovite Rus, and the resolve of over 1,000 years of history. He can't overcome history, no matter what he wants to personally believe. The realities of what people believe in their hearts on who they truly are is what he ran into. He ran into a Ukrainian people who believe they're Ukrainian, whether they speak Russian or not, whether they were forced to speak Russian under the Soviet era because Ukrainian was not permitted. His assessment, his assumptions, I believe, were completely wrong on what he was going to run into. I think deep down he did believe that he was going to run into little resistance.
Yeah.
Coming into Ukraine, and he mobilized an entire nation, even with disparate ethnic groups, different languages inside the borders of Ukraine. You're seeing, people come together.
I mean, you have to remember that he never believed that the Maidan was about people. He's still convinced. He's still convinced it's the CIA and the American embassy. He clearly doesn't know what American embassies are like. If he did, he'd never make that assumption. But I mean, those things were nonsense that he was thinking. And if those help him form his base assumptions, that the Orange Revolution, the revolutions in the Middle East were all about America, pushing for more power and everything else, and not about people looking for freedom, because he doesn't understand freedom. It's not a concept that he has, and therefore he couldn't understand free will of people, and he's just come up against it big time. I mean, it's beyond his comprehension that a lawyer in Kharkiv would throw his family in the car, drive them to Poland, turn round and drive back to fight against Russia, even though he's not military, even though he's not really held a weapon in his hands since conscription time, which was in the Soviet army then as well. So I mean, that sort of human thing, I just don't believe he has any understanding of that whatsoever, because it doesn't exist in Russia. It doesn't exist in Russia. This sort of care for your country and care for yourself and the family and this whole thing in that way, and the freedom of doing it. Although it should do, because it's the sort of thing that he wants. But it's the sort of thing he wants and his oligarchs want, but they don't want anybody else to have. This is a freedom is for the rich. It's not for the masses. And then when you add that, when you look at, I mean, one of the things that really struck me all the way through is that whenever you see Putin, Shoigu, and Gerasimov watching exercises, they're always watching them from a bunker. Yeah. With binoculars, which means they're not an exercise. It's a rehearsal. It's a scripted rehearsal. Everybody knows what they're going to do before the general comes, and they've probably practiced it 3 or 4 times, 15 or 16 times before Putin comes to watch it. Yeah. And so his view of what good is and how good is his army is completely and utterly false. It's false, because there's no decision making in anything that any of these boys do. And the big thing about this war, as much war as anything else, is it's been about leadership decision making. And the leadership decision making has failed because they never practice it. Leaders are not given decisions to make. They're given orders. And therefore, when you give an orders, go there and do this, you don't take initiative. You have to follow the order, hence driving down the road, 40 kilometers of vehicles driving down the road to go and attack when there's no way through. I mean, that is the antithesis of military of the military art.
Yeah, there is no plan. There's a script.
No.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And we know that plans don't survive first contact, but you still go in with something that you build upon through your experience and education and training, that you're able to modify the plan on the fly into, you know, a branch or a sequel by applying leadership. And when you really look at the model of the Russian army today, it doesn't allow small unit leaders to make decisions based on the tactical situation. So, you know, we're okay with sergeants and lieutenants and captains making tactical decisions that have strategic consequences. We're pretty comfortable with that, whereas Russia never has been, and because they're supposed to follow the script, follow the order, and they can't follow through if they are having success, but it's success in a direction different from what they were told to have success in. They're not allowed to follow through. They're not allowed to exploit it. And consequently, when you have catastrophic failure, you absolutely have no idea what to do. You just die in place. Is a lot of what we see, especially in the north. I think in the east and the south along the Sea of A's opposite is a little bit different tactical story than what we see up towards the capital region.
But there's less resistance there, so they're able to do things because of less resistance. Sam, I need to bail out, mate, because I have another thing to do. But I think we will be continuing this because I think we've got a few more days of this to come, and maybe even longer than a few more days to come. The only thing I would say we got so far, we've talked about the army. They're not fighting with the army now in a way of fighting. They are simply using the artillery, missiles, and air to punish Ukraine. And I'll leave you with that. This is now about hate and nastiness. It's not about a fighting thing to conquer Ukraine. It's about destroying Ukraine.
Yeah.
And
if you're not going to be my wife, I'll just kill you. That kind of.
Absolutely. Oh, hey, this is someone else said exactly the same thing to me today. Funny enough, it's exactly the same sort of logic. If I can't have you, no one else will. And I think there's a bit of that. So maybe we can talk about that tomorrow or next day, and see whether we get any more news. But anyway, thank you very much for having me on again. And
Thanks,
I shall. And Dave, good to meet you, mate. And I'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So Dave, just to continue with you here, we just had a comment here. So Putin doesn't lie to his citizens. He just believes and says what he protects Russians in Ukraine and US to destroy Russia with atomic weapon. So this was just like a bad project he invested in. Well, this brings up a really important question, which is the issue of how ugly is this going to get on the way out? And there's already rumors about, there's some really nasty rumors going out, which you always get in intelligence channels that are running around, like tactical nukes and other really bad things that could happen. One thing I wanted to bring up, which I think is important well, first of all, I think Glenn talked to a point, which is there's really two ways this can go. One is it falls apart very quickly, which everyone's praying for and hoping for. And we have bias here, which I can't control, a bit of war optimism when you're on one side or the other, but there's real evidence pointing to that being a possibility. I don't think it's just wishful thinking. And because you don't fix logistics and morale with doing more of the same.
No.
But then the second thing is it could get a lot worse and get really ugly. and you could start to see war crimes on a large and small scale, and a, you know,
absolutely. We are.
huge. Yeah, you already are, and that's clear. One thing I wanted to bring up, which we talked about yesterday, was the Russian army is operating, and I still cannot believe this. Maybe they just sold all their radios in Belarus during that big camping trip. But they're all operating in the green, and you have people, and when I say in the green, that means they're operating on unsecured radio nets, which means anyone from around the world can tune in and listen to the Russian army in real time. Not after the fact. You can listen to them in real time. And do you think the Ukrainian army is not listening in on what they're doing?
The whole world's listening, right? Every army that has the capability of receiving those transmissions is receiving them. And you know, we have special programs, and you know, there are Americans in Ukraine right now on the military side. Like, you know this, we don't have to come out and say it. But what are they doing? They're conducting special reconnaissance, you know, and they're placing sensors and listening devices and bringing that back, you know, with unmanned ground sensors. We can hear what Russia's saying in the green. And like I said, like, we're operating in the green. It's madness. It's, you know, generally in the 900 megahertz range, that you can pick up Russian military radio communications right now. You can pick it up with, you know, if Radio Shack were still around, you could go buy a shortwave radio there, and on a clear night with your antenna pointed in the right direction, you could probably pick up some Russian traffic. So it's confounding, because Russia has the capability to operate secure networks.
Well, it does if the equipment wouldn't have been sold, like I said, or lost.
It takes discipline, right? It takes discipline inside the formation to go in there and load the ComSec and to synchronize the radios, because it's a similar system to what the West has, where it's a frequency hopping system. Like right here on these things, I can go in, like WhatsApp is more secure than what Russia's using right now. If they used WhatsApp to communicate between Russian units, it would be more secure than what they're doing.
Yeah.
Which is,
even though that's an American company, and if they'd use something like Signal, they would really be doing well.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Good
job. Glad they are. Right.
Well, Dave, this is the implication for war crimes, and what you see is, I'm of the opinion, and Yuri, who was on last night, he warned us, and I think he was very right to warn us, that this is a long struggle, and not to have false hope that it's going to end quickly. I think it could go very quickly, or it could go the other way and be a protracted struggle. So I don't want to discount that possibility. But on the end of this, my big concern is, and I'd love to just broadcast this in a conversation for anyone who's watching, who could, you know, especially if you're Russian persuasion. I hope you are watching, Vlad. It'd be nice to meet you. But every single officer has to know now that the story is not going to end well. The United Nations is coming out. European Union's coming out. They're already assembling a war crime tribunal.
Yes.
Unlike World War II, if you say something on one of those nets and give an order, voice recognition technology is going to ensure, as well as digital footprints and open source intelligence, which people have been using to track the entire Russian army going into the invasion and during it, you will be found and you will be prosecuted. And you're starting to see in the Russian army people refusing to shell civilian targets. And people ask, what's wrong with the Russian Air Force? I think the Russian Air Force just actually has educated officers who are refusing to bomb cities.
The most educated military branch in Russia is their Air Force. It's the only one that really has a professional military education system that resembles what we know, is their Air Force. Their Army doesn't have it. Their Navy doesn't have it. Only their Air Force does. So yeah, that's a good assessment there, that their Air Force officers know a little bit more than everyone else. Yeah. You know, for God's sake, Sweden and Switzerland are choosing sides.
Just
you know you're wrong when you force Switzerland and Sweden to choose sides.
well, Sweden hasn't done that for 300 years since they were chased off the battlefield at Poltava in Ukraine, by the way, by Peter the Great. And it is astonishing that everyone has to know the gig is up in the Russian military, aside from potentially, Tsar Putin there. And
Well,
it's just a question of when, how ugly, how costly for both sides.
well, and this at this point too, and I don't know what's going on in Putin's brain right now, but I've respected him as an intelligent and calculated leader. And that's not to say he's a good man. I never thought he was a good man, but I always thought he was very realist. So on that hand, does he know now where this ends for him personally? And knowing where this ends personally, what is he willing to commit in terms of combat power and capability to this conflict that prevents his end state, his personal end state that's going to happen in The Hague or in a bunker?
Well, you might want to watch out, because I think the Ukrainian army just doubled or tripled its armored vehicle stockpile of abandoned vehicles that are fully loaded with fuel. I mean, I made a prediction here, and you're seeing this coming today. Ukrainian 95th Brigade have reconquered territory that's been held since 2014 in Lugansk. They're going all the way to the Russian border now, which is shocking. I think there's a real possibility, if things break, that Ukraine becomes whole again, literally. And that is an astonishing turn of events. That territory in the east, which those forces are not the main effort for Ukraine, is actually being traded hands in the way you never would have expected. Their job is just to hold people off at this point, and it's not. They're starting to capture territory.
Yeah, and I would have thought, if anything, if this were to have like a decent end, it would be Luhansk and Donetsk, or become part of Russia, just like Crimea, and kind of the borders shift a little bit there. But yeah, if what we're assessing is really happening on the ground, where there are military mutinies happening inside of Crimea, is it possible even that eventually Ukraine's able to push back into Crimea and take that back as well, as well as in the east? Absolutely possible if this stays conventional.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and I go back, because I just keep looking at Vladislav's comment up there, and about those kind of weapons, and we know it's part of Russian doctrine. It's there.
Well, look at Syria, chemical weapons, right? Look at threatening. What I think the thing that may stop him is this: he has to sleep, and he has to eat, and at the end of the day, no one rules without consent of somebody.
Right.
And no one stays alive without consent of somebody, if you think about it.
Right.
And
we're looking on the third day of no trading on the Russian market. Russia's defaulted on interest payments and all their debt. That's not good.
Yeah.
Someone's going to be quite upset about that.
So I'm going to bring up Mike's comment. Mike's was my old one of my snipers in my scout platoon in the 3rd Cavalry in Iraq, and he said the 40-mile convoy is the best gift Russia ever gave to the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
They will indeed blockade their own selves, run out of fuel, and turn to flee. I guarantee you, there's probably a couple of destroyed vehicles next to a bridge that's blown, and they're trying to get a bunch of wreckers up there past 40 miles of vehicles that are stacked, on both sides of the road, and soldier. I mean, I can't imagine the scene that's going on right now in that convoy. And what I'm hearing now is that those vehicles are starting to be ambushed by, surprise, surprise, javelins, British anti-tank weapons. I don't know the name, if it's the law or whatever. And the Turkish drones, which we just got a fresh shipment of.
Yeah. And what a welcome surprise Turkey is. I really wasn't anticipating that. Yeah, like Ivan says up there, it's a 40-mile obstacle in place. Because when they stopped on the road, they didn't herringbone, right, and open up they don't have the tactical discipline to actually go into some kind of a tactical formation that would enable logistics to move forward. And the other thing I look at is like Russia's just trying to bum rush the show, using a high-speed avenue approach and not using tactical movement and maneuver, a formation, a movement technique that would utilize terrain to their advantage. And granted, the north part there is pretty flat. It kind of looks like Ohio to some degree, but they're not using anything. It was go down the highway and get there as quickly as possible.
Well, Dave, the north part of the country is flat and a little bit marshy with some rolling hills, but around Kiev, Kiev is 7 hills, and it is probably one of the hardest cities in the world to isolate and cut off from the outside world. And
the river's huge.
Yeah. So I'm going to show this comment from a guy we know way too well. Oh man, Garrett Coker. I'm glad we're not bringing you on, man, because that would scare the world if all 3 of us got on.
That would go nuclear.
Yeah. Well, listen, I just, Dave, I wanted to end with what I normally do, and you can help me talk through this. But again, the purpose of this show is I've decided, and I've said this to people who know me. I wanted to do the Borderlands project a long time ago, which was just promoting Ukraine to the world before Ukraine was a hot, cool thing. Everyone thought I was crazy for living here. And now it's taken on a new sense of urgency for me and my fiance and her brother, who's helping me with this show, and just all my friends in Ukraine. Is this story of this amazing people deserves to be told, and also if at any way this broadcast gets out to just a few people, that helps in terms of people who write in. My old scout platoon sergeant Robert Thomas from 17 years ago writes me the other day and says, hey, there's a family in Ukraine that we need to help get across the border. And those people get in touch with me, and I have a 24-hour team set up to help people get out of Ukraine. He texts me the next morning, and he says, this is what he said to me. He said, just an update, my nephew's wife's sister is crossing the bridge into Surat as we speak. Her younger sister decided to stay with their mother, taking care of elderly relatives. One of her cousins with 7 small children were able to cross into Romania. You are directly responsible for 9 people who have never met and given their family hope where there was none. You enabled them to survive. From the bottom of my heart, I say thank you. You're an angel and right where you should be. I salute you and your efforts. Stay in touch. Robert, I'm just doing my job. We got out lucky early. We were lucky because we just decided to do that. I was a bit paranoid about this whole thing, and we simply had to keep helping people beyond our own team. And thank you for that. And I appreciate, Robert, you telling other people about this so that they could help out. A lot of people have donated financially to help us get other people out, and that's allowing us to set up this team, which is turning into an enduring nonprofit that we're going to start setting up. So I really appreciate that feedback, Robert. It's great to hear that we were able to impact positively your wife's family or her in-laws. But also, just wanted to go through a summary of the really extraordinary things that we're seeing, and some of the tough things also, so that everyone's up to date and aware and can kind of filter the narrative that you're getting from media. And I've gone straight to the source, which is Twitter, where all news is broken, and we've put together our little update. And this is from my fiance, who's way more organized than me, and we're both glued to Twitter. First thing, can you see my screen, Dave?
I got it.
Yeah. The EU and US must signal Ukraine there's hope at the end of this nightmare. This is from Alexander Vindman, not a favorite of some people, but anyway, he's a great authority in this sphere, Ukrainian birth of impeachment fame in America. Ukrainian people are fighting for freedom and democracy everywhere. We must help them rebuild. Poland is pushing the European Union to put $100 billion in financial assistance package that would help Ukrainians rebuild their country once the war is over. That's an amazing sum of money for the poorest country in Europe, which has the best, well, we all know now the bravest and most talented, intelligent people in the world. This is what the Kiev television tower, which is was the site of the Holocaust Memorial, which, by the way, this proves obviously that they're liberating the world from Nazis in Ukraine, as Putin likes to say, when they bomb a memorial to the Holocaust that is right next to the television tower. This is Irpin, which is outside of Kiev, a residential apartment complex before and after. This is the administration center in central Kharkiv, on fire, right next to the special SBU unit, which is the intelligence, internal intelligence, like the FBI of the United States. And this is the bridge that was blown up by Ukrainian forces to, that's probably one of the traffic jams, is probably building up next to this. You know, all this is going to need to be rebuilt by the European Union. Yeah, on the European Union's bill, because Ukrainians are fighting for Europe here. This is a school that was bombed out. And this is the memorial that was damaged or destroyed, the bombing of the television station. 5 people killed, right? Okay, and this is actually footage of someone who was there right when the Kharkiv administration building was destroyed. And this is the footage from the Russian airborne helicopter assault in Gostomel Air Base.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17.
17 helicopters. Not anymore.
Yes! Yes, блядь! 2! 2! 2! Сбили, сука!
And this is an enemy column in Chernihiv region that was destroyed.
Бля, пиздец, они всех ложат, всех вынимают, смешно. Хоть что найдите ко мне.
And that's
Ну, ты слышишь, что происходит?
so on the right here you have a convoy of saboteurs in Kiev that were killed by the security forces. On the left you have the remains of a Russian column in the Chernihiv region. This is the town of Bucha, north of Kiev. That's quite a traffic jam, which that road's no longer passable. And this is the voice messages that you're starting to hear coming out of Ukraine. Sorry about that here. Which is someone crying, saying 150 guys left and only 18 came back. And the Russian armed forces have finally admitted, after saying there were no casualties, that they have 498 killed in action already, which we believe, according to the Ukrainians, is as high as 6,000. Americans are estimating at least 2,000. And then this is how Russian soldiers, some of them, I've seen other videos where it doesn't go so well for them, that are captured.
Они не знают, куда едут. Они просто блукают.
You can see a captured Russian soldier drinking tea and getting to speak to his mom by video chat, telling her that she's okay. And then this is now how Russian planes have to fly, because every European Union airspace is closed to Russian planes, including the United States also. And this is what's going on to the Russian economy. Russian ruble has collapsed even greater than at the same level as the 1998 financial crisis, which was entirely avoidable, and inflation is going to be way higher. And this is what's going on. The major Russian bank, Sberbank, dropped 97% on the London Stock Exchange.
Russia's top bank is quitting most European markets. Sberbank blames big cash outflows and threats to its staff and property. The move comes amid tough Western sanctions on Russian lenders in connection with the Ukraine crisis. It seemed inevitable after the European Central Bank ordered a closure of Sberbank's European arm. The ECB said it faced failure because of a run on deposits. Russia's central bank has also told the firm to stop supplying cash to its European subsidiaries. Moscow wants to hang on to foreign currency as much as possible. It all comes just as Sberbank reports record profits. On Wednesday, it said they jumped 64% in 2021, hitting over $12 billion. But lenders are now under intense pressure, with many excluded from the SWIFT system of global payments. Sberbank had already said last year that it would sell operations in Croatia, Hungary, and elsewhere. The latest announcement will not affect its unit in Switzerland, which continues to operate.
Russia's actually admitting, no longer able to hide it, that they're taking serious blows, which is... All right, Dave. So what are your thoughts on, actually, no, here's something else here. I got to go with my show producer here. Gazprom crashed 97%. Elon Musk's Twitter spy is now tracking Putin's oligarchs. Every road sign in Ukraine is now pointing towards The Hague, which is an ominous warning to Russian troops that they're all going to be tried for war crimes. And this is the latest map, just to put in context what's going on here. According to the Russian war plans, they were supposed to be almost wrapping up the war by now. And you can see that it's, even though all these red areas are supposedly held on the bottom east in Lugansk and Donetsk, those have been held for 8 years. And everything else, be careful what red shows. Same thing with Crimea at the bottom. That was part of the Russian occupation for a long time. But they're mainly confined to roads, as I understand it, and not even occupying a lot of the villages and cities. They're still fighting just for the first major city, Kherson. Have not taken any major city, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, and obviously Kiev. And hundreds of Swedish volunteers are moving towards the Ukrainian army, which again, a neutral country. And this is a video of people from all over the world who are coming to fight Russia.
Argentina.
Colombia. Ecuador. Paraguay. Peru. USA. Japan. United Kingdom. Chile. Portugal. México.
All right, so Dave, I'm just going to try and exit out of my screen sharing here, which is a little bit harder than I thought. But any last thoughts from seeing that? How's your Twitter feed and following?
I actually follow. Let me find out. Get the name of it. Telegram. I follow some feeds on the Telegram app as well.
Yep.
Which is pretty new to me, but apparently not new to Central and Eastern Europe. So there's a lot of good stuff there. Like with everything, especially open source, you really have to corroborate multiple sources to get what's close to the true picture. And both sides are using information operations to their advantage, as they should. So you gotta wade through it a little bit. But really any keyword search in Telegram or in Twitter, a little bit in Instagram, but not as much. Look up Ukraine, Russia, Kyiv, any of those searches, and you'll come up with a bunch of stuff will just pop up. So that's generally how I'll go through it. Looking at the battle map as well. Those lines are very fluid. And I think that's something people have to understand. Just because it's red presence doesn't mean control. There's Russian presence in a lot of places, but some of that's just a pile of dead vehicles, or abandoned vehicles, or broken vehicles. And the situation's still I think is going to be fluid for several more days before we really start to develop the situation further. I'm looking at what Russia has capability wise to commit further. Like we talked about earlier, do you want to commit more combat power? Because that doesn't fix the problem. Russia's problem isn't combat power. Well, it kind of is at this point because it's decimated or just disappeared and abandoned their combat platforms and retreated. But now they have additional problems in front of them, right? They have all the trash. They've created obstacles that they have to go through. And breaching obstacles is never fun. So they've created problem upon problem for themselves for multiple reasons, tactically up through strategic level mistakes. So I think the next 72 hours is really the critical time where we're going to get an understanding of where this is heading and how long or how short this conflict could be. I think it's going to be a lot longer than anyone anticipates. Russia's committed maybe a third of their ground forces to Ukraine. I'm not saying they would commit much more than that, because Russia has other problems. And at what point can you no longer sustain the capability, a military capability, by committing so much to such a small geographic area relative to Russia's entire landmass? I don't know that they commit much more, or they have the capability of moving combat power around to affect it anyway. I'm always very cautious of what we know about Russian nuclear doctrine, and I would never assume that Russia has nuclear off the table. We know it's part of their doctrine, and it's there. It's the largest nuclear power on this planet. They will use it tactically. They will use it strategically. We know this. We've known it for 80 years, right? 70 years. That's a reality of Russia. So that's one thing I contemplate a lot, is what are the triggers for Putin to authorize the launch of a nuclear warhead, and then what's the response? And I think that's the biggest question of all, is should Putin decide to utilize a tactical nuclear warhead? What is the response at that point? And I think, yeah, Mike, I think the threat is always nuclear. When you're talking Russia, Putin can't lose. I really believe that, and I think that deep down
he can't win. Sorry, but he can certainly lose.
Well, we know he can lose, but his personal belief is he cannot lose this conflict. If he loses in Ukraine, he loses everything personally. So when you're backed into a corner, what are you willing to put on the table? Right? You have, in the game of poker, you got a garbage hand, and is he willing to go all in on a really bad hand? That's the question. That's a big question. And then what's the response if he does go all in? So I'm constantly thinking about that because
and are his generals, his bodyguards, that's the other question. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, is anyone inside? Is he the single decision authority? Is he the launch authority, or are there other people who will be very close to that decision, that are willing to prevent it? I don't know at this point. I thought I had an idea at once, but I don't know. Now that I froze up, or you did, Sam?
This episode of the Borderlands show. Sorry about the connection issues here. Dave, Glenn, thank you both for giving your insights and I think summarizing the overall opinions, thoughts, consensus that's emerging among military experts about the state of the Russian army and how this may end and what to look for. So thanks a lot, Dave, for joining me. It's great to reconnect with you after all these years. Let's talk again soon. I know your insights were very welcome for everyone here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse. And I got my own little commentary. It's all my personal opinions based on my education and experience. Whatever that's worth, 2 cents in a cup of coffee. So if ever you think I'm useful, man, give me a buzz. I'm here. I'm retired. I read, I research, and I tell war stories.
Yep. Well, David, you're my favorite Army officer from my time in the Army, so it's a pleasure to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye. And bye, everyone. We'll see you next time for another episode of Borderlands Show.